Okay.
All right. Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 36. With us, we have Matthew Goodwin, the editor of the widely acclaimed science fiction and fantasy anthology Latinx Rising, which was successfully funded on Kickstarter back in 2016, I believe. Correct?
Yeah.
All right. So Matthew's here. He talked with us about a sequel of sorts on Kickstarter now. Speculative Fiction for Dreamers.
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
Did I get that right? Okay.
Yeah. You got it. Yeah. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Well, it's, a university press book. I mean, it's through Kickstarter. This is yeah. Now,
yeah.
so Matt, so as I said, before we kind of went on the air, I was kind of talking about it, doing some, really deep diving in and just reading the reviews of your previous Kickstarter and the success that it had, and really enjoying watching the growth of your present Kickstarter now as it's getting there, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And what I'm really curious about too, as we talk about it, is your innovative pledge system that you've put into that Kickstarter. I think it's fantastic. I love that.
I didn't know it was innovative.
The consult system where you can have like all this consult work. I think that looks really fun. But first, so just get real quick. Give people for folks that might be new to hearing about your Latinx anthology series and this new anthology series. Kind of give people a little bit of background on how you got into building these anthology series.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different origin stories that I could tell. I mean, I think the clearest one is when I was doing immigration law, and I began to see that whole system of immigration law was really just surreal and absurd. And you really need to kind of think of Kafka or somebody doing some strange writing in order to represent that whole world of immigration law, where you could, suddenly be deported one day for no reason. It's like Kafka's The Trial, like they rarely tell you everything. So at the same time, I was going to grad school and studying Latinx Lit, and I wasn't seeing that sort of speculative element really prominent in Latinx literature. There's magical realism, but apart from that, not a whole lot. So I kept sort of going down that path, and there were new works coming out, and there had been some, and the tradition in Latin America is very strong. In Mexico, Puerto Rico, South America, Argentina, Cuba is very strong and goes way back centuries. So I kind of tapped into that a bit and looking at what was going on now, and eventually wrote my dissertation on Latinx science fiction, and then realized that there was, the people that were interested in that topic, they would have to start where I did, sort of, with very little information. So I just decided there needed to be some kind of anthology to get people going and interested. Mainly, at first I was thinking about academics, but really the stories are good stories. They're for everyone, and that sort of like happened. That was great. Like we did that anthology. We did the Kickstarter. I didn't know much about publishing, so that's kind of the story of my life. I just sort of jumped in, and with the help of the authors and artists involved, it worked out pretty well. And I think it's had a good impact on teachers and students and just the general speculative fiction community, because that's sort of I'm dealing with a couple of different communities, like scholars and academics who are interested in speculative fiction, Latinx literature, speculative fiction reading community, the Latinx literature reading community, and in the US and in Latin America, and sort of trying to pull all these different things together. So that's the basic idea. And then out of that process of doing Latinx Rising, I began to notice there was a lot of writers into basically doing young adult fiction. So I started to go down that road a bit and try to see what I could put together. And I think we put together something really cool, and it's definitely not the normal young adult anthology.
So what did you say, like, to get back on what you were talking about earlier? Would you consider this as I said, because some of the people that will be listening to this or watching this might have that similar passion that you would have on, maybe another subgenre that might want to collect stories in this manner. Would you say, though, was this more passion or curiosity, academic curiosity, or just like an actual passion of yours to initially kind of put this together?
That's an interesting question. I think that there was definitely the passion element. I felt like the way that Latinos were being represented in literature in general, in science fiction and fantasy, was pretty poor. And that the sort of range of Latinx literature was sort of bounded, and only certain kinds of writing and certain genres, a lot of like social realism was very, accepted as what you're supposed to do in Latinx literature, and there were certainly writers who were, directly told by publishers, we don't want to do like Latinx science fiction, like that's not what we're going to do. So I find, I wanted to push against that, and that comes from, my sort of dedication to migrant workers and immigrants in the U.S., especially from Mexico, and migrants from Puerto Rico. Not, Puerto Ricans are citizens, but that experience of migration to the U.S. and getting into that legal system that is so oppressive, and it's something that has been with me for many years, and I feel like in the last 4 years, it's sort of people, I think, are finally realizing how dystopian and how oppressive that whole immigration system is, and science fiction and fantasy have this great capability of depicting migration, going to a different world, in space, or going to a different fantasy world and sort of encountering the new, has this great opportunity to talk about, current immigration issues, and a lot of writers are doing that. There's other stuff going on as well. So the passion is definitely there, but my original degree was in philosophy, and I just have a kind of like interest, general sort of curiosity that always stays with me. So that's always there. But the other part of that is something that I think about a lot and try to balance, is that, I'm not just editing anthologies, I'm also critically writing about these works. And how can I be objective? How can I kind of like be honest in my critical analysis if I translated the story, or it was in an anthology, or it's by an author that I know, and there's no perfect answer to that, but I think it explains a little bit about the position that I'm in, and that I love, actually, because I love being able to talk to artists and get inspiration from writers and artists, and always have the idea that when I'm doing an analysis of their work, that I have to be honest, and very often I will show my work to a writer, and ask them about what they think of what I'm writing, and sometimes it can be actually very helpful, and sometimes they say, this is wrong, and that's kind of tough, like that. Um, uh, but it's so good, it's so important, and I don't think a lot of academics do that. But for me, if I'm both doing anthologizing and critical work, then I have to be as open and honest about my writing as I can.
How would you describe, like, the actual, so your first book actually has the subtitle Anthology of Latinx Science Fiction and Fantasy, where your new one is having it called Speculative Fiction. Now, was that deliberate, or that you just had more people writing more things, maybe in this new Kickstarter, some new, maybe like horror or alternate history stories, or because it's kind of more, it's more broad.
There's not a deep message with the titles there. I think that honestly, I like the title Speculative Fiction for Dreamers.
Yeah.
Because it has the double connotation of people who are imaginative, daydreamers and all of that, people who dream for a better society, and then the undocumented immigrants who are under that program, the Dream Act, so it has that double connotation, but in terms of like it was the science fiction and fantasy, I think, in the original, in some ways, just was to clarify, what it was, because I think at that time, speculative fiction, the term, was a little bit less used. I think it's kind of gained a bit of kind of commonplace usage, but other than that, I don't think there was a. Yeah,
you're right, because the word speculative and the word dreamer also kind of in the same title seems to bookend each other pretty well as well.
Yeah.
Would you consider this a sequel to your first anthology? Is there a continued theme going through this?
Yeah. So the first, I mean, both of them are really diverse in terms of the kinds of stories, the genres. There's horror, there's cyberpunk, there's dystopian, utopian, there's aliens, there's magic. So it's really diverse, and I think that's a really important part of these anthologies, but also diverse in terms of the authors, where they're coming from, their backgrounds, and all of that. So definitely, I see it as a sequel, for sure, in that sense. And the first one, really, you've got writers who are really important in the development of Latinx literature. Ana Castillo, one of my favorite writers, is there. Juno Diaz, Kathleen Alcala. These are writers who are they're in the Norton anthology of Latino lit. But there are also other writers and up and coming writers. But but the second one is really, in many ways, intentionally. Really, a lot of them are new writers, and kind of new voices in Latinx lit and speculative fiction. So it's a sequel, but kind of doing something very different. It's also trying to kind of push these new writers forward a bit.
So how did you? Because I'm gonna make an educated guess. I'm gonna use the word educated guess here. I'm sure there was plenty of resources and stories available to do this a lot. How come it's taken 4 years to put these two separate anthologies together?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a couple of things, and so one of the things is the book more or less started when I was in Puerto Rico, and I was teaching a whole lot. So the progress, went pretty slow. But then there was Hurricane Maria, which we were actually getting the submissions during the hurricane, so I wasn't able to get all of it together for quite a while. We've actually, this book has been through a lot. So the hurricane, and then the publisher I mentioned earlier, who had some problems. That took a long time, like that, and that's it's pretty risky to pull a book from a publisher that you're sort of like set up as you've got a project and a plan, and but it was important that we did it at any rate. But that then took a whole that took another year, and then it's taken even longer to sort of get to the next stage with Ohio State University Press. And then we had to put out Latinx Rising, the reprint, before we put out this one. So it's really, this book has been through a lot. And, the authors have been really patient. And, every once in a while people are like, what is going on? They also know that me and Alex and Sarah, the co-editors, are we're super dedicated to it, and we get through the obstacles, and it'll eventually get out.
So let's talk real quick about let's kind of do a deep dive a bit on your Kickstarter, and let's talk a bit about that. You guys get 3 weeks. You're as you said, you're doing really. It's going really strong. It's also made a list of the project. Kickstarter is listed as projects we love, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So how did you? Right now, this is made up of 38 entries. You have 26 short stories on there, 7 poems. 2 short plays, and then 3 graphic short stories.
That's right. Yeah.
It's split up into 5 parts, correct?
Yeah.
So from an editor point of view, putting this together as the director, the person who's putting this all together, how did you get all these 38 entries? Did you send out a call for submission? Was it people who knew you, who knew of you? And how did that work? How did you get everybody to submit?
Yeah, so there were we put out a call for stories. I contacted a number of different people that I knew would be interested. We got a lot of submissions, and the great thing is that Alex and Sarah and I, we sort of read them all together, and our choices were actually matched almost 100%, which, if you think about it, that's really kind of amazing. so that I mean, there were one or two that we had to discuss, but we did kind of like almost kind of like blind peer review, kind of, like we each voted separately, and then every once in a while we'd have to discuss a story. But really, almost the entire thing, we all sort of agreed independently what stories were going in. Um, we wanted to put as much as we could in there because we got so many submissions. But there had to be a limit at some point, so we couldn't make it, an encyclopedia. Um, but eventually it came together, and uh, yeah, I mean, then we're like, we've got to pay the authors. Ohio State is a nonprofit. They don't have funds to pay the authors a whole lot. So um, and we decided to do a Kickstarter, and it is a big risk. You could do all of this effort, and not succeed. It happens all the time. But we're pretty confident. We've got a lot of people involved in this whole project. There's a lot more people now interested in Latinx science fiction and fantasy. The genre itself has sort of come out a bit more. One of the purposes of an anthology like this is that it introduces readers to authors, and authors they may not know about. And I think it's really, they get to read a short story or a poem or a play or graphic story, and then from there, if they are really into it, they can move on and read the author's other work. And because of that, I think it's really important that anthologies like this are really diverse. Diverse as you can make them. At the same time, it has to be a good read in my mind. Like it has to be like a book that you could like just read through. It's not a textbook. And to do that is another sort of skill, and I feel like that's an intuitive kind of act, to take these stories and to put them in a kind of order. And it takes a kind of like the intuition of a reader, not an editor so much, but to sort of like take the position, like, oh, I get these stories, I'm reading them, how does it feel to read through this anthology? I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like that's an important element that for people who want to get into anthologizing or editing or whatever. I feel like that intuitive element, to take the position of the reader is really important.
So let's talk about you split it up into 5 parts.
Yeah, so each of the parts are sort of like a little booklet.
Okay.
And they're sort of like little, because the anthology is quite large. We wanted there in a way to kind of be like pauses.
Okay.
And each one has it's actually divided by genres.
Okay.
So each little booklet has a mix of genres. And it basically comes down to supernatural stories, cyberpunk, strange, weird tales, experimental, and then like graphic, and then multimedia as well. So the poetry and the drama and the graphic stories are also spread out through the parts.
So how big is this book?
Oh, I don't think we have the exact page number yet with the publisher, but yeah, it's quite big. Yeah. maybe bigger than we thought.
So have you thought about, because you had so many submissions, was there ever thought with talking to you and your colleagues about, do we want to do more books, but each you had those in different parts, making those like another all cyberpunk or all solar punk or all fantasy or all horror? Um, what's the vision of these anthologies?
You're talking about like the next step?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, Alex and Sarah and myself, we're all, we do other stuff. We're all, got lots going on. So these, in a way, they're sort of projects of love. Like we're not making money off of them. Right. That's for sure. But yeah. I mean, I've got all kinds of plans. Like I definitely have to stop myself from forging ahead. It also took a lot for this particular book to kind of get through the system. And so, that, and the Kickstarter is not out of the woods. We've got a lot to go. And but yes, there's definitely, I have an idea for a third anthology that is sort of in the realm of kind of alternate utopias, not utopia as in like a perfect place, but societies in which groups of people are working to make it better. Or some part of it has gotten better. So something a little bit hopeful, at a time period where, immigrants are demonized, and I think it might be there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance, when we think about, when we engage utopian thinking, how can we make society better? But I feel like at this point it's really necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of people are thinking that as well. It's not just me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I got a question just from the logistics piece of it. How much is Ohio State University Press? Do they have their fingers on this in this at all, by saying, hey, we want to kind of steer clear of this, or we want it to be more of this, or do they just give you and your other editors, put it together? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so yeah, because there was this kind of like long process, and hurricane, publisher falling apart, pandemic, it's it wasn't like made like maybe a normal anthology with a publisher. We sort of, the book was done and then we came to the publisher, which isn't normally how that's done. So they have not been involved in so much of the making of the book, but in terms of like framing it and like support and all of that, yeah, they've been really great. And of course did really good with Latinx Rising. So they've taken a bit of a different role than normally. We've come to them with the books, and they're sort of like packaging them and getting them out there. But yeah, they're obviously really happy to see a Kickstarter. I don't know if any academic press gets into Kickstarters.
Right.
It's certainly not common, if there are any. I haven't seen any. Academic presses, like all small presses, are struggling, but a lot are getting into fiction, which I think it makes sense in a lot of different ways, and it definitely broadens their readership beyond the 5 people that will read my academic study.
So why did you decide to do, as you said, do it through a university press and not, I mean, you're really adept at understanding the Kickstarter situation. Why did you and your 2 colleagues decide, let's just self-publish this? What was the benefit of going through a public, a university press system?
Yeah, I mean, the quick one is that we felt like a university press would be kind of stable, you know. I mean, the university presses are having some trouble right now,
Right.
but in general, they're going to stick around. And for us, that was really important, you know. And also at the same time, you know, this is changing, but you know, science fiction and fantasy and young adult literature have not been well received in academics. You know, it's taken a long time for science fiction to get through. You know, and there's certainly a lot of that going on, and it's beginning in young adult and fantasy. So we also felt like, you know, it's pushes the field in terms of academics and scholars who are going to be reading this, you know, that it's part of that community, it's part of that academic community, and it's not like you know, superficial literature, or it's, you know, it's not you know, childish or something, you know.
Do you see, and I'm kind of curious as well, do you, as you're going through all these submissions, is Latinx speculative fiction, is this growing into its own subgenre of literature now?
Yeah, that you sort of get to the heart of things. That's a good one. Yeah, I mean, my quick response is no. I feel like that, you know, what we're kind of doing is working within these sort of like um, uh, genres that already exist. You know, speculative fiction, and then, you know, Latinx literature, which both have their own histories and their own sort of trajectory. And we're sort of saying, hey, you need to like loosen your borders a little bit, because there's a lot of cool stuff going on in that intersection of those two worlds. So I personally don't feel like it's very helpful to go down the road of like, you know, that this is some sort of like you know, metaphysically separate entity, you know. And I think there can be a tendency to do that, but I don't think it's helpful, because you know, the idea is that, you know, Latinx literature, like the stories in this book are Latinx literature, you know, and that sort of changes your view of what is Latinx literature. You know, what is that supposed to be? You know, it's not just, you know, urban social realist stories, you know, or magical realism, which is basically it. Um, and then speculative fiction, you know, it's, you know, the work is being done by other people, you know, like that one, you know, people are like really kind of like breaking down the barriers in that world. And I think that's, so that just in terms of timing. I mean, the other part is, you know, in terms of like the academic element, you know, there's a whole other, you know, push to kind of recover that history. You know, like there's a number of scholars looking at Black science fiction and its effect on the field. You know, I've done some work in the history of Latinx science fiction, which is not as strong as Black science fiction, but it's definitely there. There's sort of like threads throughout the history that are really significant. And that's also that's not just me. That's a community effort. Lots of people are kind of recovering that history, that is not known simply because, you know, that sort of genre has been sort of isolated as a kind of like white genre, you know, white Anglo genre, you know, and so that story hasn't been completely told. So we're also, that's another part, is recovering the stories as well.
Right. So let's talk about your the Kickstarter now and these pledge levels. These are fun. I gotta say, I'm looking at these, but these are fun pledge levels. This is not your average. This isn't your average run of the mill. Here's a button kind of deal, but you got some very interactive. Like, it's, and what I love about this is looking through these pledge levels. You actually feel like you're part of something larger than yourself as someone who's pledging, but also you feel as though you're part of the success of the building of this community that you're creating through this Kickstarter. So
Yeah.
so talk a bit. So walk us through some of these pledge levels.
Yeah, well, yeah. Just first, quickly, I feel like, I when I first got into like the Kickstarter thing with Latinx Rising, I didn't know how it worked, but it really isn't just like fundraising. It really is community building, and like all the stuff that might be, kind of like just like buttons or little things, like a postcard or the T-shirt or the poster. They make a difference.
Right.
Like they connect this community across the country and the world. The people really enjoyed the T-shirt from the
Yeah.
the Latinx Rising one. So, so it may not be what I would normally think would be connected to a book,
Yeah.
like a serious book in a academic press, but it's got this community building element, and I've come to really like that part. And the rewards, a lot really, they're coming from the authors, and they volunteered to do like critiques of people's short stories,
Yeah.
or poetry. There's a tarot card reading. There's tuckerizing, process where an author will take your name and put it into a story. In this case, as a magic element or a spell. So there's all kinds of different ways of including people. And the other part of that is that, like these anthologies are supporting the authors themselves and getting their work out there, but then those authors are supporting other authors, like as part of the very Kickstarter, and I think it's fantastic in terms of that community building element, and making these connections that weren't there before. And I guess I saw that first with Latinx Rising, and absolutely the community of people who are into all this stuff grew, out of that process. So that was really cool to see. Yeah.
Right. And you have, so you're looking at it like for your $10 level basically is you can get the ebook of when this is
Yeah.
put out with a postcard. It looks like your $25 level is you actually get the paperback, the ebook, the postcard as well. And
then the poster, which is the poster that you see on the screen there,
okay.
which is created by a Mexican artist, Pogo.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I love it. I think it's a fantastic poster. It gets to the kind of like youthful vision, but this sort of like crazy, confused world going on as well. So yeah, that picture is basically the whole poster.
And it goes as it goes up, you get T-shirts and then posters and postcards. And I want to. This is what I think is pretty fun. Is these consultations that people can actually can get.
Yeah, that's not my idea. That's definitely pretty common with anthologies in
Okay.
Kickstarter. Yeah, and I mean, it's own like little world, Kickstarter.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who really just follow Kickstarters, and yeah, so not like necessarily Latinx readers or speculative fiction readers, or just people who are into Kickstarters and like that sort of risky kind of entrepreneurism, because if you don't make it, you get zero.
Right.
Yeah.
So this
And,
is it, because I do a back, a lot of like tabletop role playing games or comic books,
yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
so. This is not new to seeing these consultations where you would get a poetry consultation or flash fiction
Yeah.
consultation. This is normal for Kickstarter anthologies.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's totally normal.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's definitely been done a number of times. Yeah, yeah,
So that's what when I was talking to you before we went on the air, that I love
yeah,
this. I haven't seen these before, but then again, I haven't ventured into the anthology realm of Kickstarter. I've always been hanging
yeah,
out in the graphic novel and board game side of things. So this is pretty
yeah.
exciting
And
for me.
the other thing is that at that point they get a little bit expensive. But I
Right.
mean this is a great. I mean, it's hard to get good feedback on your work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
it's but I do want to say that if it's too expensive for people, they should just contact me, and we'll connect them to a sponsor who can help them out with the money, because we really do want people to get those critiques and consoles. Again, that develops, in a way, like the next generation.
mhm.
Yeah.
And so in your first Kickstarter, you had this same level. You also had these consultation awards as well, pledge.
Yeah, we had a couple of them. Um, and they worked out fantastic. This one we have more, simply because we have more authors, and they were really interested in supporting it.
Right.
So, which is, it's, we ask the authors to get involved, but they certainly don't have to at all. And it really doesn't matter if they do or don't, but that they do is great, and it's really helps out.
Right. But some of these are, it's also not only just consultations, but also being able to be in a play, like have your character in
Yeah,
this. Or I saw one where you'd get a magic wand named after you, or
yeah, it's
right.
awesome. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, these are all the ideas of the author, like, so they're creative, and yeah, really fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So with that said, so let me ask you then, were you being very specific in having more short stories as compared to poems or graphic, or you just all kind of picked what you liked, or you just ended up having more short stories as submissions? How did that?
Yeah. So my doctorate is in comparative literature, and that field is, kind of traditionally, uh, gets into multimedia stuff.
Mhm.
So we end up doing work in photography and art, and all sorts music, all sorts of media that beyond literature, because the boundaries of that field are a bit larger than just like a national literature like English or Spanish. So I sort of came originally to Latinx Rising with that idea that if I'm going to make an anthology, it's going to be multimedia, like, because I don't just read literature. I engage and analyze art as well, different art forms. So there's a photo novella in Latinx Rising, by the Puerto Rican artist Adal, called Coconuts in Space. And in the speculative fiction for dreamers, we sort of kept with that same idea, that we like all these media. At the same time, speculative fiction is multimedia.
Mm.
And I think that in a way it accurately represents the field, if you can do more than just literature. Most anthologies do just literature or just do the arts, or and those are obviously really important to have that focus. And we are focused on literature, like that is the majority. And a lot of that is simply because those are the submissions. But we included all these others as well, and I think it's fantastic. Reading a poem after reading a short story and then reading a play actually keeps the reading fresh. Because you have to kind of switch modes of reading. You read them differently.
Yeah.
And I actually think it's for me personally, and I think other people have reacted positively to that element, that it keeps the reading fresh. You don't sort of get bored by it because you're constantly moving to a different medium, although it's not jarring. They're still in the same general field. Yeah.
Well, that was going to be my leading question as well, but I think you might have already started to hint at answering it. Is, much like kind of like a conductor, or as one of my buddies who's a wedding DJ, he says you got to go slow, then you got to speed it up. What type of balance did you do with saying, all right, this has to be the first story right out the gate, it's going to be like this, and then we have to, as you all kind of pick what you wanted, how deliberate were you in finding that pace of, this has to be story one, this has to be story two, and how deliberate was that, making those decisions on how those were put in order?
Yeah, I mean, so the reality, it was very deliberate, like how the order and where things were placed. But I don't mean to be enigmatic, but there is really an intuitive there is an intuitive element. Like what sorts of stories like work pretty well in the beginning, of an anthology, and which ones work better later and in the middle, and there really is an intuitive kind of element to that. But yeah, it's definitely, there's definitely in some ways it's clearer, that kind of intuitive element with Latinx Rising, which is one continuous sort of like mixtape, and you really can like see the shifting of tones and what that does to you as a reader, like that you sort of like go through these variations, and there's something important about that kind of development. Speculative fiction for dreamers, it's a bit different in the sense that there are these kind of little booklets. There's these little, in a way, kind of contained elements that you're kind of meant to read as a whole. Each section is sort of meant to be its kind of like own little world. Yeah.
I'm imagining, I don't know, man, I'm imagining is like, I have two conflicting visions in my head about this. Either you on the computer just moving things back and forth, or you with like this big board with all these like Post-it notes, and you're like thinking, all right, no, that has to be here. No, that has to be here. Like,
well, okay, for sure with Latinx Rising, it was, I printed everything out. And there were piles, and it was definitely more physical, getting the papers around. Speculative fiction for dreamers, there was less of the paper stacks. That one definitely was more like computer moving around. Yeah, I didn't have a conspiracy board. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of like when people are like doing like like you've seen some of those documentaries on like how they do Saturday Night Live or something, where they're like, no, this has to be after this sketch or something like that. Yeah. Well, this is great, and despite the internet problems, I think we've covered a nice hour. So So Matthew, where can people find the Kickstarter? Can they go straight to your website and find that?
Yeah, there's a couple of different. I mean, you can just Google speculative fiction for dreamers.
Okay.
That's probably the best place to start, really. And Kickstarter, and you'll get there. Or you can go to Kickstarter and search for speculative fiction for dreamers. One thing to keep in mind is on Latinx Speculative Fiction website, if you go to the top, there's in the menu there's a link to the Kickstarter. There's also a link to the author artist highlights that I'm doing every day. So every day during the Kickstarter, I'm posting on Twitter and Facebook a short description of the story and a little bit about the author who's in there. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Okay. This is great. So
yeah,
they go to latinospeculativfiction.com. They can see your Kickstarter. They can follow the authors and the artists. This is probably the best way to.
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter, Latinx Files.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Which is the name of my academic study coming out in May with Rutgers. Yeah. So yeah, Latinx Files on Twitter. But yeah, you can just go to Kickstarter and search for speculative fiction for dreamers.
Right.
You'll get there. And yeah, and please, everyone, please donate. Call your friends and family. Donate. Please don't wait till the last minute. It'll give my wife a heart attack, and that's not good. So yeah, don't donate as quickly as possible, so no one dies.
So thank you very much, Matt. And when you're doing your next Kickstarter, come on by Storycomic Presents. We'd love to have you again. This has been fun. This has been great. This has been great. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, I think we're gonna go. I think we're ready to hit this, and let's just hope that the fates are gonna bless us with solid internet.
Yes, well, I'll pray to the ghost of Einstein. Get the internet going.